Okay, so to get started, I need to do housekeeping because I forgot a point, which was Overwatch. Overwatch exists as part of the arena shooter segment that I was speaking about before, so it doesn't directly correlate to the online persistent shooter segment of the market where Helldivers 2 and the other games live in. However, the reason why I bring up Overwatch, specifically in regards to Helldivers 2, and definitely in reference to the point I made in the last video, is simply that. So, while entirely different, and I get that, my mind sort of equates the arena shooter segment to like MOBAs in regards to how they function. Like, so I played League and I played, and I apologize for the snapping. I thought it was recording via the earbuds, but apparently that doesn't work. So it was recording via the phone. So I was like snapping at the end of the last video, and I apologize. I do it a lot unconsciously, but I will try to make sure I stop doing it on this one, or at least minimize it. But um, the game that I was looking for, Smite. So I played League of Legends and Smite. And I played League of Legends up to level 30 and then kind of messed around with it and then bounced out of it. Smite, the most fun for me was the arena mode, just because you just get directly to the action. But yeah, so anyway, my mind sort of puts the arena shooters kind of in that similar game concept space as these, because at least from my experience with League and probably Smite, if I had looked into it, it's when you start, you may level up your overall account and you may unlock certain things as you go, but at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do, or what really happens, is based upon that specific match. So there's no real sense of progression. There's no real sense. Ooh, I don't like that. There's no real sense of progression from match to match. It just kind of, each match you start and you pick a character, and then what gear you want to get is like your leveling path. But that changes, or well, it may not change per match. What you definitely do is you start at zero each match, so there's no real sense of progression from match to match. All the progression happens within that specific match itself. So my understanding of like the arena shooter style, not really Overwatch. Overwatch does function differently in that aspect, and I'm sure the hero shooter, that's not what it's called, the battle arena ones, the battle thing, or the 99 people, function differently. But at least for MOBAs, like, there's no real progression. But I would imagine there's still no progression. Like on Overwatch, there was no real progression overall for your account. I mean, you might get different skins and whatnot, but you're always basically starting with that specific character at that specific power level and dealing with the situation as it evolves. You don't really get, like, I don't log in on Monday, and then when I log in on, the following Friday, because of the work I've put in over the course of the week, my account is now stronger, as happens in MMOs, right? There's a lack of progression from match to match. But the reason why I bring up Overwatch in this aspect is because it was fun. Like, so back to my point about like Dark Tide and what's the other one? Outriders. Like, just how miserable those worlds feel to play in, regardless of like the gunplay and how they operate and all that stuff. Like, the worlds themselves were just mentally oppressive. Overwatch is brilliant because even for somebody like me who doesn't really like living in this space, because I prefer that progression, over time, I would still log into Overwatch, and it's just an immediate positive feeling because of the colors and the vibe and the sound and Blizzard and the artwork and just the style of the game, and its presentation is very joyous and joyful, which just makes you feel pleasant and feel good when you log in. So, to wrap it all up, at least, so like your Dark Tide and your Outriders have that really miserable feel. Division 2 didn't, but I don't really like quote unquote modern games. I tend to prefer like science fiction or hard science fiction or fantasy, like not really modern times. But like I said, I did really enjoy a Division 2 overall. That one captures, but that's the same thing. Like, especially like the theater, which is the first thing out checkpoint settlement that you, well, if you head right on the map, it's the first settlement you unlock over there. But it's like, as it levels up, it has the lights and the blimps and the stuff in the air, and it just begins to feel really warm and cozy and homey, and it's just a pleasant place to be in. I kind of like that one more than the other one on the left side of the map, even though that one's nice for its own reasons. But that's like, for regardless of everything else that's going on in the world of Division, and specifically Division 2, you have these settlements that have this, they're pleasant to go in. I found myself returning to that I keep wanting to call it an outpost, that settlement, to do, when you're when you've filled up your inventory and you have to do that time, you have to do the cleaning part of the job, where you're going through your inventory, doing XYZ. Basically, you're spending a lot of time in one spot messing with menus. I would find myself frequently going to the theater settlement, just because it was a warm and cozy place to go. So, not quite the same as like Overwatch's bright brilliance and colors and all that stuff, but still a very pleasant place to reside in mentally while you do your cleanup work. Overwatch, something similar, just a very positive vibe, to the extent that I noticed that I enjoyed logging into it, even if like I would only play like a match or two before going off and doing something else. I did notice that it was a very pleasant place to log into, and that was the point when I was talking about part 1 of why I think Helldivers 2 is doing so well. It's just a pleasant game to log into, regardless of the Starship Troopers fascism propaganda vibe, which is obviously there. Like, I'm not saying it blah blah blah. It's still just, like I said, when you finish a mission, presumably if you finish it well, you take a little elevator up to your ship, and fireworks go off. It's completely unnecessary, but it still just feels fun. And it doesn't have that mental oppression or just, God, how can this world be so fucking awful vibe of Outriders, or the first one, Dark Tide. But that was, I miss bringing up Overwatch in the first video, as was pointed out to me, so I've cleaned that up. So, thoughts on, the only reason I'm not in, I did not mean to record this anywhere near this soon, but the game is currently suffering from success again, and the servers are overwhelmed, so here we are. So part 2, which was my thoughts on Helldivers 2's success, which is really weird to say, like Helldivers 2, the S there is weird. Anyway, I made some notes. Mapped towards progression, multiple progression layers, hopes in the future of Buildcraft. So the map towards progression. So basically, alright, so I would equate this to, Mass Effect 3 actually did this to a very minor extent, but let's say Destiny, at least back when I played it, and I have no clue how long ago that was, it was a while, but it was like, it's probably still relatively relevant today. I know Outriders, it is the case. Division 2, here's what I mean, right? And I'll talk about like in regards to MMOs too, because that's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about this originally. Now, this has been partially mitigated, at least with something like Destiny 2, because, okay, let me take a step back. Classically, for massively multiplayer online games, what would happen, and those were basically where I've lived. So I played EverQuest very briefly, then Earth and Beyond, City of Heroes, EVE, World of Warcraft, Star Wars: The Old Republic, Star Trek Online, Final Fantasy XIV. So, like, I typically live in the MMO space, though I do branch out for a third-person and first-person shooters, right? So, what would happen... Oh, I'm making sound again, I'm sorry. What would happen is, like, City of Heroes really had a really bad game. Okay. An expansion would hit, okay? So so you're playing the game, or the game comes out, you play the game, right? And this is the game as presented. And even like if it's a really good game, you have like that end game thing where it's like you have these specific dungeons and they require this specific power level, and you may have another level of dungeons above that, and so on and so forth, up to a very specific point. Like probably not too many levels, especially because if you really start to consider it, like the amount of high end raiders, while almost always still there, isn't really the most of the population. So a couple levels of difficulty, with the first one or two maybe easily, or not easily, but being able to be handled by the majority of the population, with it becoming more and more restrictive as you go higher, requiring higher coordination, more powerful equipment, a dedicated team, etc., etc., etc. Like so, but you have that. That's what happens when an expansion comes out. Like that's your tiers of content. So typically you level up, and you get to the end game, and you begin to go through the end game progression, right? Until you hit the cap. Now that can take X amount of time to Y amount of time, and have all of these mitigating factors about it, but especially if you're a dedicated player, at some point, more than likely, you're going to hit the cap of the content, and that's kind of what it is. Now, it can be sort of extended by running alts, or bringing multiple other players in to level them up or get their gear sets up. But at some point, you're going to hit a stagnant part of the game. Like, it will no longer change until the next expansion comes out. And that's when you have a new infusion of content, and it repeats the treadmill, right? And for a lot of us, that's a very fun experience. Now, this is, from my understanding, again, because when I went to go back to Destiny 2, it was very not friendly to returning customers, as it were. But from my understanding, specifically from watching Skill Up Skilt's channel, they've gotten better at doing like the live story updates. So like you may have a large content drop, which is like the next book or the next major chapter, but in between these they'll be dropping a content expansion and content just to keep the story moving and living. I think Guild Wars 2 does something similar to that as well. As time goes on, to give you, so it's not just these large periods of stagnant lack of content with, these massive infusions, so much as still large infusions, but overall growth in the story or content that you have available. Now, that's kind of how that works. Now, specifically in regards to Helldivers 2, and in this case referencing Dark Tide and Mass Effect 3. So, Dark Tide, which do I want to start with? Let's start with Dark Tide. Dark Tide now has made some changes. I did go back recently. I may need to write down Mass Effect 3, but I'm not gonna, so I'm probably gonna forget. Going back to Dark Tide recently after the expansion that they did, I really did like, I'm sorry I'm making noise again, I really did like the combat and skill tree expansions. I could build my Psyker out to a much deeper level, where when it first launched, I felt there were ideas that I had that I couldn't really get to, and the skill tree was kind of there. It really didn't make an impact. I mean, it made an impact. Like, there were certain levels that made impacts, but, like, if I remember correctly, like, there would be time periods where you would only get defensive. I think it started that way. Like, you would get defensive abilities, and then you would get, like, your first offense ability, and that's what, like, you were always looking for, but you had to claw your way through all of this to get to it. I just remember being underwhelmed by it, and it was, like, serviceable. But it was not something that was like, I was really excited to start playing around with it. It was like, okay, I guess this is here, and it does make a difference, and I can kind of do things with it, but meh. Now, with I don't think it was an expansion, but they did an update where they completely redid all of the skill trees, and I do like what they did there. There's a lot more playroom. They expand by like 3 trees, and there's like little branches on them and links between them, so you can make little interesting paths and do things. And it's like, what I distinctly remember feeling like was it took the capabilities of the quote-unquote first-gen Psyker that I had designed with the existing system, and it didn't completely gut it or change it or make it bad, but it let me build off of it, almost kind of how Outriders Outriders expansion added the third slot to the gear, which would let you take your existing content and build that out. Dark Tide's updated skill trees did something functionally similar. Like, you could still build what you had before, and now you could add on to it. You can make it more strong in its specific aspects, or you could sort of bend it towards a different aspect if you wanted to do more of a hybrid type thing. So there were a lot more options available in the skill tree, which I did enjoy. And if I'm being completely honest, there was a whole separate new amount of missions on a different tab that I had not messed with, so I'm not entirely certain what those were. I had mostly only played on the first missions that they had type thing, so I don't know what the new missions were. However, what I will say, and again, another point is that I did notice, I want to say 1 to 2 new missions with different maps and tile sets from when I played it originally. So there were changes going on, right? I'm not saying that the game itself is stagnant and that they haven't made great changes. Like I said, the combat in Dark Tide is amazing, and the vibes and atmosphere and all of that stuff, the music is phenomenal. That's all really good. It's simply the fact that it's Warhammer 40k specifically, so it's very mentally heavy and dark and oppressive, which is fine, and the vibe and really what you want, but at the same time isn't really a comfortable, it's not Overwatch, you know what I mean? Like, it's not pleasant and pleasurable and this positive pop to log into. And of course it's going to be like, well, of course you don't want it to be Overwatch, it's Warhammer 40k. Yes, that's not the point. The point is that when you're logged into the game, that's when it's kind of dark and heavy and oppressive, which can make, spending, hour after hour in the game, day after day, kind of feel heavy. Where logging into Overwatch as a counterpoint is bright and poppy and whatever. Anyway, so that's kind of, so the thing about Dark Tide is that you do kind of a similar thing. This is why I like relating it to Helldivers 2. You do kind of a similar thing where you have a map of all of the different missions that you can run, and you have multiple difficulty levels, which have obviously an increase in difficulty as you go through them. They could have different modifiers, they could be, but they're basically in the same sort of location, right? So you'll run this specific tile set on difficulty 1, and then as you get more experienced and level up, you'll feel more comfortable, then you'll run that same tile set on difficulty 2. Now, is there a difference between the two? Yes, because there's going to be more monsters spawning, or more powerful monsters, or different monster types. So there's definitely a difference per difficulty level. It's not just like the same specific enemies are there all the time and they just have more armor, more firepower, blah 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 blah. Like, no, there's a difference. There's a noticeable difference, and it's fun and it's good. Like I said, the combat in Dark Tide is amazing. What I mean in this specific instance, at least in regards to my thoughts on the success on Helldivers 2, for somebody like me who likes looter shooters and progression, is that, so at some point, and like I said, I have 300 some odd hours plus in Dark Tide, but at some point you realize you're just running the same missions over and over again. Which honestly is actually kind of the way it's been up until now. You always, I mean, at least in the games that I've played in this space, like, even I don't want to make noise. Even in like Division 2, like you're unlocking, like, even if you reset the map and you go up to a different difficulty level, you're running the same outposts. It's always that. It's maybe a different difficulty, and that can be implemented to a level where it's like, this is pointless and dumb. All you did was, double the health of this guy over here. It doesn't really feel different. Or, well, where it's like, okay, each specific difficulty level introduces new enemy types and new sources of combat, and makes the combat puzzle change into a whole different way. Like, that's how it's done well, because this is how we've had it this entire time, right? Now, but that's like, those are the missions. Like, you go look at the map, you may have different ones available. Outriders did it too. Like, you had these specific maps available. Now, you may have different maps available at any given time, but after a certain amount of time, you will have run all of them. You may have favorites, you may not have favorites, but, this is the map. These are the maps. This is the map, right? And this is the game that you play. Now, Mass Effect 3 operates similarly as well. Specific maps that you have available. I don't want to go too deeply into the weeds, but the reason why I bring up Mass Effect 3, especially in this discussion, and relates to Helldivers 2, and what the other thing that I'm finding fascinating, is that for Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, there was a galactic war going on, similarly enough. Now, a lot of it, especially before the Legendary Edition, because Mass Effect 3 multiplayer is not actually in the Legendary Edition, so you would actually have to get the game itself, and I believe, at least as of a couple years ago, the game multiplayer was still live and active, and it's still fucking amazing. Now, to be fair, the community has been getting smaller over time, so I can't speak to just how active it is, but it's good. It's good. If you've never played it and you like living in this space, yeah, it's fun. Anyway, so there was a galactic map in Mass Effect 3, and it had like different, I want to say quadrants or sectors or something like that, that were percentage overrun or so. Again, I haven't played this in a while, but generally you get the idea. Like, there was, this particular area was overrun, 100%. This one is 100%, but you had like 5, 6, I don't have the specifics, but let's just say 5 or 6 different areas, and each of them had their own specific percentage of how much the bad guys were taking over the space. Now, what you would then do is you would load into the missions to help clear this space. You would run X amount of missions at X amount of difficulty, each possibly having greater or less extent of how much percentage points it would take to clear the area, until the map was clear, right? So you would run the missions in Sector 1, and then you would run the missions in Sector 2 until, they're all showing completely at, I think it was our forces were being able to hold back the defense of 100% or something like that, right? So that's what you would want to do. That's that kind of being able to play to the map. Now, the reason why it doesn't really have that much of an impact in comparison to Helldivers 2, even though it is an implementation of a similar service, is that it was not really hard to move those percentage points. Like, it wouldn't really take too many matches to run the map, and I think you may have been able to run one mission and it ticked the percentages up. Like, I would just log in and just run random, just because that's what I liked. It was fun, and I wouldn't even consciously think about it, and the map would be it. Not only would the map already be fully cleared, but it would be fully cleared like early into the night, to the point that you're never thinking about it, right? It's never really something that triggers your brain in what you're doing for the evening. If you like one specific map, you're going to log in and play that specific map. Whatever's going on with the 100% and what sectors are cleared at any given time is not really impacting any of the decisions that you're making for the night. So it was implemented, but it wasn't really impactful in that aspect. So this brings me to Helldivers 2. So, Helldivers 2 is not a looter shooter, okay? So that's out of the gate. It's not a Borderlands, it's not a Destiny 2, it's not a Division 2. Like, you're not going through and getting drops off of everybody that you get. It's definitely far more similar to living in the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer or Dark Tides type space, where you have an objective. But okay, let me take that back, because one of the huge things that I really appreciate and really love about Helldivers 2 is just the scale that they're doing everything. So how do I take a step back here? So it's not a looter shooter, but it does have progression. So it has progression in regards to just pure leveling, and as you level up, you get access to different in multiple screens. So in one way you're leveling, which is based on the medals that you get, which you can find in missions as well. If you search around through the map, you get medals, and these medals are used in one menu screen or shop, I guess, to unlock different types of equipment. So you have different primaries, like you have shotguns and not an autocannon, what's it called? An assault rifle, a submachine gun, you have different capes, you have different helmets, you have different core pieces of gear, you have boosters, which you can use excuse me, per before a mission to, well, in the mission select screen when you're deciding which pieces of gear or which what are they called specifically? You're picking. So in the mission start stratagem, in the mission start screen, you pick 4 stratagem and 1 booster plus your primary and secondary and grenade and maybe something else. But I think that's what I know right now, or yeah. So the acquisitions, commendations, whatever. The metal store gives you options for different primary weapons, different secondary weapons, different grenades, different boosters, as well as visuals, which is the capes and the helmets, as well as the ability different pieces of armor, which are light, medium, and heavy, which theoretically have differences, but from what I've been sort of seeing on the subreddit, they may not be fully implemented. But yes, all of that is in your metal store, or the store for metals or commendations or whatnot, and you can get those. You get those by completing operations, which is 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 plus missions in one sector, all tied to a specific operation. And then as you complete each mission within the operation, you get a specific amount of medals. But you can also find these medals just out on the field. As long as you're searching and looking for the lights that are off on the screen, you can basically pick up these medals. And so these medals are used in that specific shop. That's number 1. So that's one version of progression. There's a whole secondary level of that, which is like the premium store, which requires currency, but also, just like the medals, the currency itself can be found out in the field. So I really like that. Because it's like, you could just eventually get it just by playing the game, which is how games used to be amazing. Sorry, I made noise. But yeah, so I really like that. So, but that's like progression system number 1, okay? Progression system number 2 is your abilities or strategies or stratagems, I believe, which is a different menu in a different area of the ship. Now, these are the abilities that you carry and you can use 4. Now, these go anywhere from which special weapon you want to use, like a light machine gun, a lighter light machine gun, an auto cannon, a real cannon, all that stuff. Like, this is within the stratagem section. Also, like the type of abilities you use in combat, like turrets, or calling down an airstrike, or calling down an orbital strike, like all of these, and there's quite a lot of them. There's quite a lot of them reside within the stratagems menu. Now these are unlocked in 2 different ways. And the first way is by your own specific character level, which obviously, well, you level by doing missions and blah blah blah, basic leveling system, right? But as you level up, you have access to higher or more powerful levels of stratagems. Now that just gives you the way to get this access, or to unlock whatever it is that you want to get, requires a completely different resource, which you find out and about on the world as well. They're yellow. I think now I don't remember because I don't have the screen in front of me, but it's basically money, right? You have to find money out in the field, and that's what you use to purchase your access to whatever stratagem you've unlocked at any given level. So that's the next sort of progression system, right? So you have your gear and equipment, and then you have your abilities, and like I said, there's a whole lot of these which you unlock access to as you level up, and you have to you grind to unlock the ones that you want specifically, and then there's a whole other progression system, which is buffing your abilities. Like, I finally got the first tier of the build that I've put together and I'm currently testing. Requires a lot of upgrades, I think 6 different ones, and I finally got the first level of that, I want to say last night, But the one I unlocked then was 10% cooldown on sentry turrets, right? So that's that's what I mean. Like, I'm running the sentry turret, so like I unlock this third progression system that allows it to cool down faster or drop down faster or blah blah blah. It lets you add a boost or a boon, or it makes whatever abilities you're running better as you unlock higher levels of this. Now this requires a similar money system, but this uses a different currency system, and higher levels require multiple tiers of currency, and those higher tiers of currency you can only get by running harder missions. So this is definitely, you really need to get, deep into the woods and running some higher mission levels, theoretically, to really start to unlock the higher levels of being able to boost the abilities that you got. It's multi-tiered, and I like it. The only thing I quote-unquote don't like, and take this with a grain of salt, is kind of that last screen where it's like the boost to your abilities is less of a okay, so I can see that it has pros and cons before I say this, and as I was thinking about it, but like, it's not this is what you're picking for this build, which I guess makes sense, because you are going to have to run different missions and run against different enemy types, and because you're running those, you may need to use a different gear set, so you can't be limited, and so it can't be as restricted as an MMO. So I get it. But let me at least finish the point, even though I've now disproven myself. It's not you would be picking into whatever the abilities that you're running type thing. It's yes, you'll get the abilities, you'll get the boons to the abilities that you're running, but you'll also end up getting all of the boons to all of the abilities over time, assuming that you play long enough. Which I initially kind of didn't like, just because I do like more of a specialized type. But again, I've already talked myself out of that, realizing that you may need to change up your things depending on who you're facing, so it would be bad to limit you to that extent, because then you'd not be able to face the threats if you have to change the gear that you're running. So, okay, I get it. Right, so there's that level of progression. So there's multiple levels of progression here, which is good, right? It's good, I like it. Implemented similarly or dissimilarly to other games in the same space, it has its own level and layers of progression. But the thing that I like, outside of all of that, which I do like, but the thing that I like or have noticed outside of all of that, unlike all of the other games, except for, to a lesser extent, Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, is the map. So, there's the Galactic War and the map itself, and the map has different sectors, and in each sectors there are multiple planets. Now, part one that I really like about Helldivers 2, especially against something like Darktide, is that they've captured the right feel of landing on a planet. So, like, in Darktide, you're running missions against Hive City, I believe it's called, which is just like a mega city built upon itself, which can house millions to billions to trillions of people. Like, potentially all of the population on one planet could be in one super Hive City, or maybe 2 or 3 spread across an entire planet. Like, so this is large, but it's Warhammer, so it's a large, grotesque example of technology. But like, in Darktide, you're running missions within this Hive City, and it's corridors, and every once in a while you'll see an open space. In the overall design of the 40K universe, at least in the video games that I've played, is very large, right? So it's not that, even though you're running missions of 4 in corridors in a Hive City, it's not super cramped, right? Because the art style and presentation of the world itself is very grandiose. I actually don't know how to say that. I know how to spell it. I know the word exists. But it's large. It's presented very spaciously and giving in Gothic church vibes everywhere, right? And it's just that very imposing, but large and spacious, but also contained and within itself, because you are still running missions in hallways and dealing with hordes and swarms of zombie type creatures and large snot monsters and all that stuff, right? Um, Helldivers 2, you're literally attacking a planet. Like, when you land, and by the way, dude, the fact that you load into your mission by getting shot down to the planet's surface in a giant bullet is fantastic, especially because when you invariably die and are called back down to the surface, respawned, you can literally, at the end of your descent, you can move your super bullet around and actually take out targets with that. So yeah, you're getting shot down to the planet by a ship grade gun. But when you land and when you get out of the pod and really look around, there's space. It's like a space. Now, yes, this is not Star Citizen. You do not have access to the entire planet when you land on a mission, to the extent that, if you go out of bounds, you'll hear a warning and blah blah blah. I'm not saying that the map that you're on specifically itself is infinite, but visually the presentation is expansive. You really do feel like you're on the surface of a planet assaulting an alien world, and that's a really it's a good vibe. It just feels right, and it feels like you can kind of stretch, especially because, like for instance, in Darktide, like when you run these missions, you're running on the same maps and the same tile set. So while there may be hooks and crooks and little secret passages here and there, and if you would have to dig around here, and maybe this whole room isn't used on this particular mission type. So people ignore it, but if you learn that you need to go explore off into the corners because there may be secret things there. Like, that's the standard presentation of like a mission in Darktide, where you land in Helldivers 2 and you're on a fucking fenced-in segment of a planet. So you wander, you explore, especially, depending on the missions. Like, if you have, like, the defend one, obviously you're not doing this, but for the majority of the ones that have, like, a 40-minute time limit, like, that's where you land and you do your primary mission, and then you just explore the space to find the secrets and the points of interest and the hidden currencies that are tucked around. Now, you will begin to notice pretty quickly that, like, some of the little point of interest designs are recycled, but it's kind of fine. I do wish there were more of those, just so that it didn't hit you quite that fast. The counterpoint, however, is that does mean that you get to learn each of these points of interest and learn what to get and look for pretty quickly, which can come in handy if you're being chased, or you're running down the time on the map, because more enemies spawn the longer you are on a map, which makes it more difficult, which means you can be pushed off of a map if you're running too slowly and you're possibly by yourself. So that sort of familiarity does help in that aspect, but it would still be nice, I think, to be able to have a couple more point of interest designs. Just a couple more. Anyway, minor complaint, nothing in any way, shape, or form serious. But yes, like, you land on the surface of a planet, and this is where you are. Like, this is, you feel that. You see the sky, you see the background, and it just feels vast, and that's a really good vibe comparatively. Especially because, like I said, there's not much. Now, there may be more in this space that I've not played before, but at least in regards to the ones I've played, this is not really a normal feeling in that regard. Typically, it's far more restricted and limited. So there's that, but there's also all of these planets. There's multiple planets per sector, so each have their own vibe. Like, okay, so I was running in the eastern side. I was on the right side of the map. Fighting the bugs. In the sector that I unlocked, my mind translated to saying that there were 4 planets. There was Mars, the Moon, Nightmare Jungle, and Alien Garden. because I tried each of the 4 to see which one I kind of liked, and I liked Alien Garden, which apparently they liberated today. They have completely different names, and I have no clue what those are. But like vibe wise, presentation wise, the top one was Mars. It was like sandy and red and hard to see more than 2 feet in front of you at any given time. And the second one was the moon. It was pale and the lights were stark, and it was hard shadow. Alien Jungle, I may or may not have run that mission at night, but it was dark and jungly and like dangerous feeling. And then not Alien Jungle, Jungle Nightmare, and then Alien Garden, which is like pinkish, but just pretty. It's just fucking pretty, and you could see well, and it was just really pleasant to be on there. Now, it was kind of hard to wander around because you'd get caught in some of the plans, and they would slow you down. But it was just a nice place to deploy to. Now, but that's like the difference, at least even in this level, between something like Dark Tide and something like Helldivers 2, is that I can choose, at least until the planet is liberated, to base at any of these and run all of my missions, and it's the same missions theoretically are available. Like, your defend menu, your rescue menu, your take out your things here, your take out your thing there. So you have. And not only do you have that sort of randomized, procedurally generated mission type with, being able to wander around the maps to find the secrets, which are, I at least haven't consciously realized that they were in the exact same spot every time type thing. But then you get to pick whatever fucking planet you're on in and of itself, which changes the whole vibe, because that planet may have a jungle, may not have a jungle, maybe on the moon, maybe on Mars with a giant sandstorm. So that's fucking amazing in and of itself. Like, that level of, I've not seen that I can think of presented to that extent. But outside of all of that, there's the whole galactic war thing, and this is my specific point in regards to Mass Effect 3. Which is, like I said, the planet I was running on last night, I believe, has already been liberated, so I won't be able to go back to it. But there is, like, the Helldivers that are currently running missions on these planets, and all of these missions that you finish a mission and you get 0.00010% towards liberation. So, like, it's a big deal. These are large campaigns, but these. You run all of the missions on all of the planets to clear that sector, but the left side of the map. I have no sense of direction. The left side of the map is where the bots are, and they are currently pushing out from their initial. When we first loaded in, the right side of the map had the bugs, and they were pushed pretty deeply towards Super Earth. So most of us have been spending our time pushing the bugs back. Disclaimer: I was not part of Heath. I think I joined up like the day after, or maybe I think the day after Heath was liberated. So I was part of the next one, but not Heath. I was not part of Heath. So, like, the right side of the map had the bugs, and they're, like, different sectors towards Super Earth, so we had to push them back. And the bots were just living in, like, their far back end, I think, or maybe one, but I think the back end sector, like their home system. So we pushed back, and the fact that I can talk about it like this is partially what I mean. We pushed back the bugs, like 1 or 2 sectors, and now the bots have surged, forwards towards Super Earth, and I ran one of those missions last night, and it was fucking epic and basically impossible. Like, it was this game is actually surprisingly immersive, to a really good degree, but I don't want to talk about that this but yeah, so like, this exactly what I'm talking about right now is something that's not in any other game in this space. The fact that you can have this map movement, and your people are taking and losing sectors. So it's not just clearing all the missions on one planet, or clearing all the missions in one hive city. You have multiple planets, which their own biomes and feeling and vibes, which feel proper good. Multiple enemy types, and I think my understanding is there's a third one that hasn't been introduced, and I would not be surprised if there was more because there's enough space on the map for it, especially if it keeps growing like this. I can't wait to see what they do with this game. But that level of overarching progression isn't really something that I've really seen in any other game in this space, at least that I've played. Because you could finish out all of your missions, not all of your missions, all of your metal store, and have all of that, and all of that. You can do all of your progression, have everything at max. But no matter if that's the case or not, and you can run on whatever mission level difficulty you feel comfortable running on, that's where every other game stops. This one, you have still the whole galactic map with all of your fellow held. Like, I went to work and I was like, we lost the planet. We took the planet, or they, the bots are pushing out of the east. I think I've just fucked that one up. The bots are pushing out of their sectors. And have that conversation and see like the way they're presenting it, and just I was not a part of the group that took back Heath, you know what I mean, especially for that initial thing, and I actually really got to miss the fact that I wasn't there, like to an extent I rarely ever felt in any other game. I really miss the fact that I'm really sad that I wasn't part of the crew that took down Heath. But I am glad to be here to see all of this and see how the map is evolving. It's kind of like I played Eve briefly. Like I said, I'm not really much for PvP, so it didn't really stick with me too much. But what I still love to this day is seeing all the stories that come out about what's going on in Eve, and who's taking over what space, who's pushing back, how many ships were lost, and how that relates to how much money. This feels kind of like that. Like, when, a month from now, who knows what the galactic map will look like, and how many, what will be there, where we will be. Maybe we lost Heath and took it back again. Maybe, you know what I mean? All this sort of quote-unquote living, breathing story that comes just from the continuous evolution of the galactic map is fascinating to me, and drawing in a way I've not seen in other games. And just, knowing I could still be max level, but that planet's at 2%, homie, you better jump in. Like, that sort of drive. Okay, that just means I can run on the higher missions and take some of the enemies, some of the foes that some of the lower level guys aren't able to handle. That's what my job now is at max level. So that's fascinating to me. That sort of galactic progression, that overarching living story, I think is also a big draw. It scratches that sort of need for progression in my head, in a way that, games that are far more stagnant don't do. Because, like I said, you just kind of get here and run all the missions here and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like, okay, we're assaulting a hive city. What's changing because of that? What's the consequence? We ran this one mission 413 times. Has anything happened? Has anything changed because of that? Are we winning the war? Are we losing the war? And that's not something I thought about really before. Especially when I played Dark Tide. Like I said, I've got 300 hours in it, so I gave it a fair shot, and enjoyed it, obviously. But that was just the gaming space. And this one now, the fact that if and when I get to log in tonight, I probably won't be able to go to the planet I decided to base at last night because we've already liberated it. That's kind of cool. That's a change made by the community that I had a minor part in, just with the missions I ran last night. But like, that all happened. I wasn't online for that. And that's fascinating. And, maybe the bugs push back again, and now we've got to reclaim this, and then there'll be another faction introduced, and another faction introduced, and this game hits in a way, this game hits in a way that's interesting. It's very interesting that I haven't seen other games do. Now, again, I haven't played all games ever, so there may be something else that did it like this that I wasn't aware of, but that aspect, the non-stagnant map aspect, is fascinating to me. So yeah, that's part 2. Thank you.